Hi, I'm Paula Scaffidi from Fiberella.com. Welcome. Today we're going to visualize Rulerwork in Bernina Designer Plus software. Let's take a close look. There are some simple steps to enter your rulers into the software and lots of fun ways to creatively visualize and fill the space for your project. Sometimes with rulers we are stitching on the outside of the acrylic, and other times we are stitching over on the inside. On the left here you can see there's a simple shape that's been overlapped. It's key to get those rulers into the software at the scale that they're going to stitch out, and I will show you how to easily do that. In this pink project at the left, you could probably see that there are two horizontal rows of ovals. There's also a staggered or an offset additional row of the rulers all the way throughout. Whenever you have an offset ruler design, you're likely to find an interesting intersection, and it's very simple in the software to decide what you want central in your project. On the right hand side you can see I've even begun to digitize some pattern fills, perhaps applique, to fit into the intersections of the ruler quilting. In other words, over time you may decide you can work the process from the end toward the beginning. If you know what size and shape rulers you're going to be using, you can design all kinds of different things in the software that will coincide exactly with your quilting plan. Here are 4 examples of just experimental, playful designs with one thing in common. They are all the same size and shape in terms of how much space they occupy. That's called the floor mat. It's really fun and fast in the software to play around with the features until something catches your eye. You can improve quickly the things that perhaps you don't like at first. A quick note, at the upper left there's an all-over pattern repeated twice using an array function. Upper right, a less symmetrical design. There's quite a bit of copy. Right-click, copy and drag to overlap some rulers to fill a space. In fact, here there's only one object, one stitch out that seems to go off the edge of the format. All of the other shapes in the upper right are complete objects, closed objects. In the lower right, again you see objects that extend or seem to extend beyond the edges of the format. There's a staggered effect that's a little unusual here. Instead of repeating the exact same distance across as vertically, I've changed it up a little bit to be more suitable for the rectangular format. It kind of freshens up the look of a cathedral window. In the bottom left, there are symmetrical objects and there are also asymmetric things. The placement of, for example, this small circle onto this one creates a kind of asymmetric cluster. However, when you repeat that asymmetric cluster, it gains some symmetry back. What fun to find out if you have rulers on hand that are going to precisely fit where you would like to place them. The placement of the crescent and moon circles, scaled smaller and larger, I intentionally offset to create some motion. You can see in an instant what you like and what you would like to improve. We're going to create some designs on a grid, find out how a basting and marking plan makes things simple in the transfer from what you see in the software to what you're going to stitch with your rulers at your machine. You can even, as you can see over on the right, visualize how much of your stitch out the binding is going to cover. In some cases, as in the lower right, you will go ahead and place rulers outside the boundaries of the part you're going to see inside the binding. And that works out great. You don't have to stitch all of that, but you do want to come out just up into that binding anyway. The binding will cover any knots there, any changes in direction, and additionally, all of this extra space on the outside shown in green is perfect for testing thread tension. You want to have that wide enough so your rulers can move nicely with the quilt sandwich when a shape is extending outside of the design area. It's going to be important to enter the rulers in a way that you can remember what is the stitch out. Am I using the outside of a ruler, or am I stitching inside the hole of a ruler? It's very simple, and I will show you how you can do that. So on the lower right, you can see the binding has just been visually added, and you can see that it wouldn't be necessary to do all of this quilting well beyond the border of where you're going to trim your quilt sandwich before the binding goes on. So all of that works out nicely in the software. I'll begin by showing you ways in which I typically use layout. I like to keep things organized in my mind so that all three layers, top, batting, and backing, I consider to be the green area, and the blue area is my design field. That's the part I'm going to see after the binding goes on. You can quickly audition where you want to place a central design. We're going to explore the knife function. Here you can see there is that diamond shape in the center. Sometimes the rulers you own may not exactly fit the format you're working toward. So I will show you how you can shift things around, trim things off, and audition, would I like that diamond in the center, or would I perhaps prefer that butterfly shape in the center of this project? Outside the ruler, if it's a closed shape, you are going to be adding 1/2 inch. And inside the ruler, if it's a closed shape, your finished stitching is going to be 1/2 inch less than the width and the length of that hole in the acrylic. So with any closed shape, it's minus or plus 1/2 inch. By the way, I want to mention that I have the ruler foot up for the purpose of photography so that you could see the needle penetration point. But just a reminder, you never begin to sew or lower the foot with the ruler that close to the foot. You would lower the ruler foot first and then gently slide the ruler over against the outside of the foot. Just a safety tip so you don't crash down on your rulers with that nice ruler foot. Some sets of rulers are designed to be inside ruler sets. We'll take a look at how to digitize those. I will say it can be confusing at first because some brands are going to tell you your stitch out. For example, in the lower right, this particular oval in the Bernina set is going to stitch out to 3 inches by 1.5. And you can see from the ruler, the hole is actually 1/2 inch larger. Now, some other brands might tell you the size of the ruler itself. So the simple system we will use today will clear all that up for you in the software. If you haven't already calibrated your monitor, I really encourage you to do that. You can go ahead and check out the instructions in your manual. Ideally, here I am holding this 3 by 1.5 inch ruler right up to my monitor. I had just digitized the 3 by 1.5 dimension in an oval, and you can see the ruler is a perfect fit, 1/4 inch around. It's wonderful to be calibrated to work in scale. Simple numeric entry for circles and ovals is quick. It takes a little bit longer when you have irregular shapes, but it's fun to scan them. You can digitize right over the scan, measure the acrylic ruler, and then make sure what you digitized is the correct size. Not hard to do, just a couple extra steps. Here I am with my phone in hand taking a picture of this ruler for you. I will quickly digitize this 4 by 2 inch and show you how I keep track of the fact that I'm stitching inside the hole of a ruler. We'll work on the grid a bit with some basic shapes, see how quickly we can fill a format. I want to remind you, when you scan, you don't need more than what you can see on your monitor. And even if you have a monitor with 100 dots per inch, 75 is generally adequate, and it's a smaller file size to scan by. So you'll have to go into your scanner settings and adjust that. And also of extreme importance is going to be to adjust the scale, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. Here I used a piece of red cardstock and simply put the ruler face down on the scanner bed, put the cardstock on top of that, closed the scanner, 75 DPI, and 100% size scan. I did the same thing without the red cardstock. And everyone's different, but for me, when I'm digitizing, sometimes I find this sort of black and white and pixelized thing happening here a little distracting. So generally, if I'm in a hurry, a piece of cardstock, and you can try whatever colors you have on hand or whatever pleases you, but I generally will just pick up a piece of red cardstock. If you feel like exploring your scanner settings, on some scanner software you can really up the brightness, the contrast, which is what I've done here. So this is both brighter and of higher contrast. Interestingly, this is also brighter than the original scan, but it also has a little increase in the contrast. And you can see how you can smooth out your scans. So if you find a setting you like, make a note, and you can just use that. Even with the red cardstock, you can increase brightness, decrease contrast. In the case on the red, it's a decrease in the contrast for me. So just play with it and see what works for you. So there's no need to scan ovals and circles. Any shape that is a little bit unusual, I recommend scanning. You might think you could measure the entire thing, but sometimes the curves can be quite elegant, and just small differences that you want to capture, just so. So scan setting reminder, make sure your scanner is not set, fit to page or 90%. It needs to be set at 100%. And a little reinforcement here for what's ahead. Red is the ruler, and turquoise is the color I chose for a stitch size inside the hole of an acrylic ruler. Handy to have a tenths to the inch ruler. I like these when I'm doing a lot of entry into the software and I've switched perhaps from metric to inches. It's very nice because instead of having eighths, you might have 2.3, or you might have 2.6, or even somewhere between 2.6 and 7 could be entered as 2.65. You are going to need a good ruler to measure your acrylic rulers with, and it's helpful if it's clear and long enough. So the first goal is going to be to enter those rulers, scanning the irregularly shaped ones. Lots of different wonderful rulers on the marketplace. So find out what works. This one, the color looks a little different because there's a skid-proof backing on it. So they're all different, and choose what helps you see the ruler in the software the best. At first I thought this Bernina wave and scallop ruler was not going to fit on my scanner. And then I just said, oops, yeah, if I put it in at an angle, it just fits. But in the meanwhile, I also realized that I could enter two photos, two scans into the software, overlap them, and digitize. So again, the proof is at the end, whatever you have digitized. Here I've digitized in red for the ruler, in black for the stitch out. Before I create that stitch outline shape, I make sure that my red ruler shape is identical to the acrylic itself. The second part, boy, once you get all those rulers in there, what a lot of fun working inside a format. So today's format is going to be, consider this, a 4-inch graph paper. I'm going to be working 16 inches across and 12 inches high in the design field. And I'll show you how I like to set up my files to begin that play. The format is the container. The design field is the part you are going to see after the binding is attached. The process is the same for all scanned rulers. I will show you how some different grids can help you out. You may have to adjust the angle of your photo a little bit, but generally digitizing over 100% scans, adjusting nodes after the first digitizing, measure the ruler, adjust the measurements in the software, then add that outline for the ruler itself. Now some rulers are a little difficult to measure. This one is irregular in a number of interesting and different ways. The point that is here is actually farther from the peak or top of the ruler than this one is. But fortunately, there's a very nice crosshair etched into the acrylic. So you could use, ideally, a piece of graph paper, and you could put a little pencil dot maybe at the highest part, the widest parts, and then just measure the graph paper. But for the purpose of this photo, I just used a cutting mat and stretched out some measuring tapes. So this ruler I know is 4 1/4 inches by 6 1/4. Overall, that's what you want, the overall measurement. So rulers are red and outside stitch out is black. A quick little thing about corners. You might notice over here that this ruler has a very sharp corner, and just outside the black stitch out looks very rounded. There's a different option you can select in the software to make sure that your curves are curving and your points are pointed on corners. And this little thing that happens in the software is just to be ignored. We are not performing embroidery. This is simply visualizing. And again, red is the ruler, turquoise is what I'm using inside. So in that software, you will be able to see that you have an option for corners that has a nice pointy corner. It is not rounded, it is not truncated, it is sharp. So that's the one you'll need to use if you have corners in your rulers. Nodes are the edit points. Those of you who have been doing this for a while are familiar with the right click makes a curve and the left click is almost like a little anchor where you change direction. And we will look at how we can use guides in the software to help us drag those out and help us sort of straighten out if our nodes are a little bit off when we're digitizing. We're also going to digitize an extra outline, fill it, and quickly convert it into a vector. I'll show you how I use vectors to organize my rulers. What fun once you get those rulers in there and you start playing. And I will show you how I keep my files. I usually have a really messy one where I'm designing something, and then another file where I'm going to paste things I kind of like so far. We're going to go over the layout, the grid, digitizing, and circles, ovals, rectangles, some copy and paste. editing the nodes, checking our measurements, creating the outlines, and using the knife function, which comes in really handy for deciding what's going to be in the center of your design. The mirror merge functions are just a lot of fun, and I will show you all of those today. So once you have something on screen that you love, the question begs, how do you get that onto your fabric? I like to do the least amount of marking. I like to use the marks on my rulers, and I love it when my basting of my sandwich provides some of the guidelines. So I'll show you how I do that and invite you to think about how you would like to do that best for yourself. So a grid was used to stagger first 2 columns of touching horizontal ovals, and then a 3rd column of offset ovals. The grid was set to a size that worked nicely with the oval stitch out, but I would never want to baste this many basting lines. The ruler is small and I simply don't need them. I don't need even a basting line this large. Usually, depending on the size of the ruler, you could baste the size of the ruler itself, the overall size. But in fact, I'm going to show you some ways that are even less basting, a little bit of chalk marking perhaps, and they work very nicely. Now, when something is irregular, you have this grid in the software that you can set the spacing on. But here you'll see the intervals are irregular, because what I wanted to do was to place a circle overlapped with another circle, and for my design field I wanted a partial circle to extend off the ends left and right. You can see that I've dragged out a number of these guidelines. The reason I have 3 of them here is because I want to stitch out a 2nd horizontal row and a 3rd one. And then I want to know where am I going to begin. So in the software I could picture that I'm going to begin in the middle horizontal band. I'm going to begin with one that overlaps the center. I may even begin to think about where I'm going to begin to knot on, depending upon whether you like stitching counterclockwise or clockwise. You can think through your stitch path and come back to an intersection and then go ahead and finish out another circle. The other ones can come in from the sides. So that would be just 1 knot and no knots from the side ones in the interior. I like that plan. My ruler would be placed here, my stitch out being larger than. And let me back that up. So the first one, the second one, the last ones. This indicates a basting line around my design field. I typically stitch 4 stitches to the inch, 1/8 of an inch outside the field. Now I'm just picturing, where am I going to place that ruler? I certainly don't want to baste all of these guidelines, so let's see what I can do. How about if I just baste 3 vertical lines? These 2 signify the left-right placement of the first stitch out. The 2 horizontal basting lines signify the top and bottom. And this 3rd vertical just shows me where that ruler stitch out is going to end. With just those lines basted, I could chalk 2 more lines and I'm good to go. And once I have a plan, I'll show you what I do with that in a Word document. When I get to my fabric, I kind of forget about the design. I locate the center of my fabric. I do it with an X and a plus sign, and I mark it somehow. Once I know where the center of my fabric is, I can then look what's the distance to my basting lines from the center. What is the distance from this center horizontal line to the basting line? You can see all of it in the software. And so it's very easy to go ahead and put those numbers in. You can check out in your software 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 inches. I'm 7 inches between those basting lines. And you can mark it down on a document that you put a screenshot in. So by the time you get to your fabric, you just have to make the X, the plus sign, find the center, look at your plan, do your basting, add in your couple of chalk lines. Well, let's go and take a look in the software. The layout tools come in really handy for visualizing ruler designs. Here's how I use them, but feel free to use them however works best for you. Under Toolboxes, if you click on the Layout tab, you'll see a place to define a work area and one to define a quilt block. Work area default color is green. Quilt block default area is blue. If you left click here, it will bring up a settings box where you can specify the size you want. So for example, I'm using quilt block as my design field, the part that's getting quilted. And I unlocked proportional scaling and put in the figures of 16 inches wide and 12 inches high. And if I left click here on define work area, I've added 4 inches to each of those measurements, providing me with 2 inches of extra space. Now, you could have a project where you would like that to be larger because your rulers are larger. But for the purpose of this small format example, 2 inches is good. Also, you could notice that up in the toolbar, there is an icon for your work area and for your quilt block settings. And by left clicking on those, they disappear and reappear. And if I leave them both off, you'll see I have a couple of rectangles. And right now these rectangles are embroidery objects. There are 2 sizes. Since my my design field was 16 by 12, I went ahead and added just 1/4 of an inch to that number. This is going to signify, in my mind, the 1/8 inch outside of the design field where I typically baste. I added 3/4 of an inch, so I'm at 16.75, 12.75, as a reminder of where my binding is going to end up. What's going to be underneath my binding, I'm going to hide this inner one. Right click to hide the selected, and then I'm going to put my design field back up. And you can see that shows me in an instant which of these rulers, how much of that ruler might be in that part being covered up by the binding. So let's turn that back off, open up color film, right click anywhere and just unhide all. And now I can see both of my rectangles. I digitized them simply using the rectangle tool and an outline. And I did use the arrange tool, align the centers in order to get everything nice and even. Now I'm going to select them both. And by the way, left click is lime, right click is rose. I'm using a bounding box. I've grabbed the 2 of them, and I am going to go up here and convert embroidery to artwork. Left click, vector is what I want. Okay. Over here on the Corel side, I now have vectors. And vectors can be moved on the Corel canvas, but not in embroidery. By double-clicking by the pen icon, I can change these lines. I'm going to bulk them up to 1 point. They will still be visually quiet, but a little easier for me to see. Okay, and go back to my embroidery canvas. And now this object cannot be moved, and I can also come up here to vectors. I can come up here to show vector artwork or not, if I would like those to disappear. So that's how I set up my whole layout, and I am ready to show you about the rulers. To digitize with numeric entry, it's great to use the grid. And in this case, right-click on my grid icon. I have set up for a 1 by 1 inch grid. Snap to is engaged. And the reason I'm doing that is because most of what I'm going to design here can be evenly divided by 1 inch. I wanted to have a visual reminder for you that red is ruler, black means I'm stitching outside the acrylic, turquoise means I'm stitching inside the hole of the ruler. So let's put that grid on and select the ellipse tool, and also select, make sure I have outline. And by the way, I had all of my colors up here before, and after I digitized a turquoise color, a red, and a black, I simply said hide the unused colors just to clean up the visual clutter in my space. Okay, so back to the grid, and I am going to digitize that oval that we saw earlier, the Bernina oval that is going to stitch at 2 by 4 inches. So it's stitched inside the hole of the ruler, so I'm going to select blue, and I have ellipse to digitize, and I have an outline. So left click is lime, and this is going to be a 2 by 4 inch oval. Left click, and you can see the red crosshairs means I am snap to grid. I am going to left click after I've come up 2 inches. I can come back down the 2 and slide out 1 inch, left click, entry, letter O on the keyboard is object, and from there you can go up and see that this ended up 2 by 4 inches. That's what I was looking for. While it's still selected, edit, outlines and offsets. Now let's think about this. Red is for ruler, and in this case the ruler is larger than because I'm stitching inside the hole. So I have a positive value of 0.25 as an offset outline. I only need one of them. Overlapping and corners don't matter because I don't have overlapping shapes, and I'm not doing anything with corners. Left click OK, and there is the ruler. To digitize a circle, it's a tiny bit different, and it's just as easy. So digitize. Again, I have my ellipse tool selected. This time I'm going to digitize a 6 inch stitch out. So I'm going to left click here on black. I have ellipse, single outline. I'm going to come over where I have a little more room, and this time right click. I'm going to go up 3 inches. I'm going to right click again and simply hit enter. If I use the letter O, I can select the object, and once again you can see the measurements. This stitch out is 6 inches, 6 by 6, perfect. And while it's still selected, edit, outlines and offsets, I want red for the ruler, but this time the ruler is smaller than. So I need to come back in here. I don't really want to do all this adjusting this way. So I'm going to highlight and I'm going to enter minus 0.25. And I have 1, it's single, it's red, okay. And there's my ruler. So that's how you set up your layout, one option, and a quick lesson on entering the rulers numerically. Circles, ovals, squares, and rectangles are ideal for the snap to grid feature. I've set up my grid as a 1 by 1 inch, and I'm going to show the grid. Turning off the layout will help you better be able to see how these shapes, when you move them around, you can find your red lines to see that you are lining things up in a way that they're going to fit. I like having that design field available. And what I'm going to do right now is just show you a couple of simple things in the mirror merge tools. So I'm moving these over, and here is the center of my grid. I'm going to go ahead and select a ruler that I've brought in. Let's see, this is a 4 by 2. I'm going to use that oval, and here's what I did quite simply. I went ahead and put that oval in a place where, well, I didn't want it quite touching the center. I didn't want the design to get too complicated. So with it highlighted in the mirror merge drawer, I've selected the wreath tool, and up at the top, you can see up here, there's a place to put in how many, and I'm going to select 4. And wow, that's an interesting shape just like that. But to create, you can spin these around and see what you like and where they're going to snap into place. And here they've snapped in nicely. I could tell from the 1-inch grid I needed a 2-inch circle, and I knew I had a ruler that was a 2-inch circle. And I brought that into place. I could also see on this grid, especially if you take the time to make a rectangle that firms up the outside edge a little bit, it's a little easier to see that I have a 4 by 4 inch area. So knowing that a 4-inch square or circle would fit really nicely here in a square formation. So I'm going to take that circle and I'm going to mirror merge it both horizontally and vertically and zoom in a little bit so I can catch my cursor on the very center of this design. Click, and there you have it. So I noticed I had some empty space here. It was 2 inches across, and that would leave me with a nice 1-inch area around the outside. So I simply used the rectangle tool to digitize an appropriate sized column, single outline. I'm going to use my black thread, and it's very simple to just pop in something that you can do with your straight ruler to fill the space. And if you select that object with O, you can go ahead back in the mirror merge drawer. You could copy it and paste it, but you can also say mirror merge horizontal and catch the center of that design again, and your visualization is now complete. Use the insert artwork icon to locate your scan on your computer and bring it into the software. Once the image is in, you may have to adjust it by its angle. Here I have a 1/4 inch grid setting, 0.25 of an inch in both directions. But it might be easier for you to see this way. If I bring a guide in, you'll notice it overlaps that marking in the ruler quite nicely. Seems to line up just right with the guides. But over on the other image, it's not quite the same story. And let me zoom in a little so you can see that. The guide is not really lining up with that mark. So I have to adjust the angle of that photo. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select, and since I've already digitized, I'll select that as well. Select both of these, and there is a rotate tool in the toolbar. And since I wanted to try something less than 1 degree, it's just off a little bit, I tried 0.5, and actually I got lucky the first time, because when I pulled that guide in, you can see it's lining up now with the mark in the ruler. And also the horizontal one is lining up now. And that's what you want. You want to try to straighten out the angle of the image. All right, so the other reason that's good is because when you turn the grid on, not so much with these rulers, but like in a ruler where you had 5 scallops, you could often just use a particular line in the grid as you're digitizing. So here I am going to deselect, left click, whoops, Control Z, didn't want to move that. I really wanted to move what I've already digitized. So I'm going to pull that off to the side. And if I change the color of that, let's unhide colors and click on black, and then you can see that. Okay, so to digitize, you want to try to use as few nodes as possible. And it's left click and right click as you digitize a closed object as an outline. And I chose yellow because it showed up on the red. And I want to make sure I do not have snap to grid turned on. See, it's off because I'm not really trying to locate my points in that grid. I'm just using the grid as a visual reference while I'm going around what I can see of the ruler. So I've got a left click at the edge of the ruler, and I'm thinking it looks a lot like a circle, so I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to try to find that spot and left click, and very close already. Coming down here, I see part of a circle, but I'm thinking it's not going to be enough to just have one right click. But let's see what happens. There's a right click, and I'm coming down to the corner. I want to avoid putting in, well, look at that. It's pretty close. I want to avoid putting in a lot of extra clicks because it just makes for bumpy shapes. I can always come back and fix this. And because this doesn't make a hard end of a curve before it curves the other way, I'm just going to come along here and use all right clicks. And maybe, since it's turning pretty quickly, maybe I'm going to turn it there. About here looks good. And I might be able to just hit enter. Let's try that. Oh, what did I forget? That's me. So what do you do if that happens? O for object and edit nodes. Enter is what I would have hit if I was close to connecting to the beginning. But instead of throwing out everything you've done so far, there's a really easy way to do that. Just go ahead and select the object, select edit nodes, and then you can come back in here, and I know I'm going to need a left click on this corner. So just put one in and stretch it around until you find the corner. That'll work. And then you know what? I bet if I put one right click right here and I pull that in, I'm going to get pretty close to what I need. So you can see that by using not so many nodes, you can actually end up with a cleaner, nicer shape. Now to see that better, I am going to go into my artistic view and object so I can see my stitches. And I might even take the stitches and make them a triple so they show up more. There, that's better. And then if I select again, edit nodes, I can come back in, I can see a little bit better. There really doesn't look like too much I need to do, but I can move it and I can zoom in a little bit and say, nah, I think that needs to go just about, well, let's try one more time. My mouse pad, I sort of stuck on it. Okay, so that looks pretty good in there. Do I look like, I'm a little off the ruler here. Let me come back down. But you get the idea. Letter P is helpful when you're zoomed in because it immediately brings up your little hand to move. And then if you use the shortcut letter H, you can get right back in here and select a node. I'm going to pull it out so there's not much for me to look at here, but it's about in here. So it's kind of that process. And then as you go along, letter P, I'll look at it a little more closely. This looks a little lost in the shadow here. I'm thinking I might be able to take this node, letter H, I might be able to put that node up in here a little more. Well, if I do that, then there's some ruler hanging out down here. So that's a good example of a spot where if I right click, I can add a curved node, and I needed that extra node there. So I hope that helps you out with that. Once you have letter O for object, you need to come up and check and see how you did on your size. And I can see here I have 4.3 inches by 6.245. So I am going to go ahead and just after I'm satisfied, I'm going to check and say 4.25, and you have to make sure your proportional scaling is unlocked. And I'm going to change the height of this object to what I measured the ruler to be, which was 6 1/4 inches. Ooh, I missed. 6.25. There we go. That looks right. Enter. And so now my ruler object has been digitized, and the outline process is really just the same. I'm going to convert that with a left click to red, bring it out here where you can see it, and then with the object selected, edit, outlines and offsets, and this needs to be not an object outline, but an offset outline. I want it to be black. I want the offset to be only 1/4 of an inch bigger, so 0.25 as a positive value, 1 count, single stitch is fine. I'm going to select black, and because I do have a couple of points in this ruler design, I'm going to select the sharp corner option. Oh, what did I do? Let's take a look. I think I forgot to change my increment. So let's see, edit, and outlines and offsets. Object is selected, outlines and offsets. Yeah, I had a 1 inch offset. No, I want 0.25. That will be what I'm after. Okay, now we have it. So red is the ruler and black is the stitch out. Ideally, you have aligned your scans in another software before you insert them as artwork into your design file. you can see here where I have my guidelines, and I'm using the already aligned images along with the guidelines in the software. Well, instead of selecting the photo and trying to angle it or using the rotate tool, those tools are not really ideal for images. So what you can do is you can simply go into Corel Paint, and under Image you can straighten an image and zoom in, zoom out, and just save it without cropping it at all. Once you have it in the software, if you have two images because the ruler was larger than your scanner, just go ahead and select an axis point somewhere on the ruler that is recognizable to you. And there was a handy mark on the ruler, and the vertical is just along the tip of the acrylic. And you can see using that same mark with both images allows you to get a really smooth, continuous image to digitize over. Once you have digitized it and you have created your red for ruler and your black for embroidery object, all you really need to do at that point is to be sure to copy, or even Control X, remove that so you know you have it on the clipboard. You don't need to keep this file. Same thing is true with digitizing any ruler. And I just wanted to point out here that while I'm not using Snap to Grid, it was helpful to have those grid lines available to kind of see where I was putting my right and left clicks. I wanted to be sure my image was straight, and I could kind of see that it was a left click, a right click. I don't even need this extra. See this little node right there? Not necessary. Go through and clean up your file using the least number of nodes needed. And again, you would simply take that red ruler shape, check the measurements, create the outline, copy and paste. So now where are you going to paste it? Right now I still have on the clipboard the ruler that I had copied, and here you can see it appeared off to the side. And I could easily, I've already done it here, I could easily have gone back to that other file and said, this is my ruler object. I'm not editing. I've checked my size is just what it needs to be. Then I am going to edit outlines and offsets, 1/4 of an inch larger in black, single, okay. And then at that point, I can take all of this out of that file, Control X, come into a clean file or a file you have already set up for your rulers, and paste. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could have drawers and cabinets added to our studio as easily as we can create areas to store rulers? I've set up the grid here at 12 inches by 12 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new compartment, just a rectangle in an outline, and it doesn't matter what color. And I'm going to use Snap to Grid to create that shape. And while that object is selected, convert it to a vector. Let's see, view. I don't really need to be seeing my page over here, so I'm going to hide that. Okay, so here's the vector shape, and I'd like it to have a fill. So you can choose your fill from color viewers or color palettes. I usually like to just get into color viewers and find some sort of a not too dark, but a muted color. That looks fine. And if I don't want the outline around it, it's a double click on the pen tool, hairline, none, OK. And now I can return to the embroidery side. So here's a new space. If I wanted to organize circles and ovals, for example, I could decide I was going to put all of those over in this area. Whoops, Control Z. Why did I not catch all of them? Let's do this. There we go. Sometimes my wireless mouse plays games on me. Okay, so I have them here, but they're still a little bit hard to see. So I want to show you how to make them a little easier to store and to see. A simple thing to do is to select the red of the ruler itself. And I am going to select the smaller shape first, push down Control key, left click on the other, Control copy, Control paste, convert to a vector. And now I'm going to use a weld tool. And I'm going to say, no, I don't really want to have an outline. And while it's still selected, I'm going to select a fill. And this time, I'm just going to say OK over here. You can see the shape appeared. But I'm going to go ahead and select that shape again and a 10% gray. You can work however you want to work with whatever colors you like to look at. But there you are. I now have a kind of a shadow shape. It reminds me of an old-fashioned a workbench where you've traced around your tools. You want to make sure you don't lose things. So what I don't want to lose is the red ruler shape. I don't want to lose any of it, but I'm going to take those two, right click, and I could click lock. But let's just say I've already taken care of creating all these vectors. I could select all of them and right click, or I could even just say, please let me view up here, view only by color. Selecting red, OK. Everything else has disappeared and vectors can't be moved. So I could select all, bounding box, and just go ahead and lock those. And just to double check that I have locked all those shapes, you can take a peek in color film and you'll see every object that is red is now locked. To go back and see everything, just go back to View, View All Colors. And now what's possible is you could be selecting rulers that you would like to copy and paste them into a new document. So that's basically how I have been storing my rulers. And if you do ever want to move those vectors around, you can of course do that over on the Corel side and then move the embroidery objects around on the embroidery canvas. So in the a design workspace, on a good day when I come into my studio, I have clean space to work. I'm going to move a couple things here. And you can see I have Snap to Grid on. I think, let me put that so it's centered right about in here. There we go. Okay, so Control Paste. And these were the ruler shapes that I selected from my ruler file. And I can go back and forth and say, well, now I think I want to use a wave or something else that I have in my ruler file. So you get the idea. You can copy them, but the goal is that you're leaving everything in this one file. If you ever accidentally goof and you manage to delete the stitch out sizes, you can still unlock the red lines and do outlines and offsets and recreate those. So here you can see I've got multiple areas I wanted to show you that you can do it that way, and you could also select a different vector color. This is that Bernina ruler that is an inside ruler. So I still wanted to see my red lines for ruler and my blue lines for my stitch out, But I went ahead and made the vector a different color to remind me that I'm stitching inside the hole on that ruler. Back in that design workspace, let's see, I'm going to take a couple of objects here. Let's first just play with an oval. And in fact, I could take a small oval and place that right inside here. I wanted you to see how quickly the software will create an array for you in Mirror Merge tools. You should play around with all of the tools here. Array, and it made 4. But if you go ahead up to the top, you can see that you can specify the number of rows and the number of columns. So quick math here, 4 to each square maybe, and 4 squares. So I would need to have, wow, 16 of those. Let's see if I can do that. 16 columns. Yes, 16 columns right here. And now you can see that's going to be enough of these if they were touching. And I might want to come down a little bit here. Let's see. My mouse is at high speed. Let's just do that. And then I can take, if I want, a row at a time here, and I could have my snap to grid on, and I could adjust that grid, the horizontal spacing to 2 inches. And that'll just help me see a little bit better as I'm getting this snapped into place. And rather than readjust the other, I'll show you another simple way to do this. And of course you could set this array to fill the entire field or beyond it. Another simple thing to do here is just simply to take that stitch out and say Mirror Merge Vertical. Only by placing your cursor in the center of the design field, you can instantly see what that would look like. So array is wonderful for an instant fill, and you can even do an offset layout with the array tool. Over here, if I took one of these ovals and brought it in to the center, I could go ahead and do something with my, I think I'm going to make it off center. This is going to be more interesting to me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say I'd like to reflect that tool. Look at that. Well, it's still set up for 16 columns here in reflect. In array, it's going to place them all at an angle. But gosh, play around in here. I did like that reflection, but I don't need to have that many of them. Let's go up here and change this to more like 8. And that's still more than what I need for the space, but I can go ahead and click those. And now, because I have extra, use a bounding box to grab that. And now I can look at, do I really want that design to be centered in the center of my workspace? And gee, wouldn't it be handy to have another grid line? I could go back into my settings and say, just please put me on a 2-inch grid here. That will work. And now I can go ahead and find my center a little more easily. And this is a little taller than that 2-inch, but I can still see that this is lining up. But you can see this design doesn't exactly fit in my design space like that. And if I were to move it over, well, it's not really going to fit here. I could take one of them off, Control X to hang on to it, and then take 3 of them and say, you know, I want that little center to be right in the center of my design. Let's try that. well, maybe that's more of what I wanted. Or perhaps what I wanted was simply to get rid of the excess here. Now, you can go into Edit when you have something selected, and I could in fact select the whole thing at once, Edit, and select the knife tool. And because I have Snap to Grid on, I could go ahead and say, you know, I just want to get rid of everything from here to here. I could even continue across because I'm not cutting through the magenta colored lines. And to here, Enter. Deselect by clicking off the item. And now you should be able to come in here and only catch the part that has been disconnected and delete it. I do want to add something else to this conversation. If for some reason you are really excited about this, but you don't yet have the knife tool in your software, there's a little workaround that you could use, and maybe I'll just demonstrate it on these ovals. Let's change my grid to a 1 inch. And that's going to make it a little easier for me to take these ovals and say, you know, maybe I only want to be stitching out half the ovals. And so I want to visualize that. What you could do is you could take a rectangle tool right here. Sorry about that. Okay, I've got a rectangle tool ready to digitize, and I am going to digitize a little bigger than I need, but I'm going to come across. I've only got 16 inches. Enter an object, and I'm going to fill it. So now I'm going to say that I would like to edit. I would like to remove the overlaps. And now when I move this away, you can see those are gone. So that's just a workaround that does work, and I think we have looked at all the mirror merge tools. Really have fun playing with adjusting the numbers, the values for the wreath and the array tool. Okay, and also explore that array, filling a whole field and then maybe doing an offset. That's fun too. So once you have a design you like, I don't like my workspace all cluttered up all the time. So let's say I had decided I liked this design. I'm getting rid of this. You can see that I could have done all of that at once to get rid of it, delete it. And let's say, even though I haven't filled in enough to my liking here yet, let's just say I was wanting to keep this. And I wanted to go ahead and remove that excess. Remove overlaps under Edit. So now I can take the part that is at least a beginning of something I want to work with, and I can select it, Control X, and I can get into a separate file where I am pasting designs that fit a 16 by 12 inch format. And I can go ahead and Control Group before I mix that up, and I can place it in this file. The last thing you need to do once you have established there is a particular one that you really want to stitch out. This one I feel needs some more work. It's kind of like having a sketchbook in the software. Once I have something I want to stitch out, I can go back and paste that one onto my layout, adjust my guides if it's in a regular grid placement, and I can take a screenshot and paste it into a Word document. So here I've pasted it along with the guides and the measurements. And you can see also that if I wanted to save some ink or have a little more space to write, I could change the color of the layout in the software. Just right-click on that blue quilt block and change it to a light gray. And when I paste my screenshot, I can size it to be smaller, all of which is going to save me both colored ink and ink in general. Sometimes within the Word document, you can just simply type in the values for the spacing, so you have a little roadmap to doing the basting. You might even at times save something you're working with, go back, edit that design by adding more rulers, changing some spacing, paste it into the same document, and then decide which one you'd really like to stitch. Bernina software is useful to imagine a wide range of different kinds of projects, perhaps more than you may realize. I hope you'll come back to Fiberella.com and see some of the other ideas being presented. In the end, I'd like to remind you that a shape as simple as an oval and/or a circle is enough to begin. And later on, you may find you're comfortable enough to begin to visualize a larger project. In the center at the left, I'll bet you can spot these ovals. And the oval stitch-out shape that was repeated as a wreath and converted into an area of fabric to be embroidered. There's an outer band here I've begun to develop as machine applique. So lots of fun things to explore in the software. And don't forget about the knife tool. I have changed a row of this ruler stitch out into a satin stitch so you'd be sure and see the area that I'm talking about. Can you imagine just taking an oval ruler and sliding it horizontally across the surface while quilting? Quilting under one side, over the other side, move the ruler, again on top, move the ruler, the other side. So much fun to be had. I hope you'll enjoy all of the features that we looked at today. And if you get to a place where you are beginning to plan a larger project, don't forget about the use of vector shapes to be able to see colors and not add to your stitch file, especially if you begin to add pattern fills, as I've done here with a blackwork design. Coming soon on Fiberella.com, Visualize Ruler Play. Building on the topics from today, we'll take a look at auditioning thread color, even thread weight, and fast ways to represent the size, shape, and fabric color of your project in the software. This is Paula Scaffidi, Fiberella.com. Thank you. Thank you for spending your time here today.